Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. McNallie Money, the official home of power analysis. The end of a very successful trading week, both for the Bitcoin miners / AI infrastructure plays and for the price of Bitcoin itself. We're going to be covering that in addition to action from Stretch, production results out from BitFuFu, and a nice little construction update out from White Fiber. A lot to get into. Before we do, take a second, smash the like button, guys. Big help to myself and the channel. Anthony absolutely loves it. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comments section below how the portfolio is looking this week and your top pick in the sector currently. With that being said, let's get into today's episode. All right, guys, away we go. The final podcast of the week, Friday afternoon. This has been a fantastic week in terms of Bitcoin price appreciation and the stocks that we cover in the sector. We're going to be coming on to that in a second. But Anthony, Bitcoin making its way now up close to $73,000. We talked about that big catalyst at the start of the week, Trump's deadline, the deal in the Middle East. It seems the deal itself may have fallen apart a bit, but Bitcoin's momentum has continued.
Absolutely. We seem to be holding nicely up the 70,000 range and actually went above 73,000 for a very short period today. But it looks like we're going to end the week positively up, over 5.5% over the last 5 days. We take 5.5% a week on any time of the year. So a good end to the week, and hopefully we can get through the weekend without too many issues. Ready to start a new week on Monday.
There you go. Yeah, we'll see when Asia comes online Sunday night. I was going to say the exact same thing. We'll take what we can get right now in terms of Bitcoin price. And as we pivot over to Stretch, they're having a big impact, essentially moving the price of Bitcoin single-handedly. I've got today's excerpt from stretch.live, the website. We've also managed to find a historical for the entire week, Anthony. I know you can do some math for us here. This is pretty incredible when you think of one company, a single week, what they're able to accumulate.
Yeah, and if you think about the weekly accumulation of 7,641 Bitcoin, that would effectively put them 16th on the table of public companies just for the last 5 days. Averaging over 1,500 Bitcoin every day of the week. It's just amazing. And if you start plugging that number into what they need to get to 1 million, it doesn't take that too many days to get there. And the likelihood is, if they can maintain that now, 1 million by the end of the year is a case of when it's going to happen, not if it's going to happen. Another thing to let you know is the production of Bitcoin in the current cycle is 450 a day. So if you're going to produce 450 a day, how many days will it take to deliver 7,641? It's going to take you 17 days to deliver that. So 17 days of production has just been purchased by Stretch this week alone. Never mind all the other institutions and retailers that are buying Bitcoin. This is just, you can't, continue at this rate there unless there's too many weak hands out there giving up their Bitcoin. But we know that, some of the miners are selling, so that allows for some of that production to be purchased. But some of them aren't selling the Bitcoin, as we've covered in some of the updates we've seen this month here. And so the challenge is as more demand outstrips the supply of Bitcoin available, that should really, from an economic point of view, move the price up.
Yeah, you definitely think so if Economy 101 serves me well. Now, another company that's having a big week on top of Stretch is CORWV. We broke the news yesterday about that landmark deal with Meta, increasing their agreement up to $21 billion. Today, they broke some more news as it relates to Anthropic. So this is not only great for CORWV, you can see the share price reacting positively. It's also great for our good friend Core Scientific, who's really putting a lot of the compute capacity together for CORWV.
Yeah, and Core Scientific are delivering 590 megawatts of compute. But remember, this deal with Meta and the deal with Anthropic isn't about today. This is going over the next sort of 5-6 years. And so therefore, some of that contract that they're negotiating with Meta and with Anthropic there is going to drip feed into potential miners who have the power to deliver the data centers that will start generating the HPC compute in a timely way for those contracts to be fulfilled. And so, it puts all the miners in a positive position because they're the ones that have got the power. They've all nicely aligned with data center builders if they haven't got the expertise themselves. We've covered many of the miners who, were just solely Bitcoin miners. They've attached themselves to companies that have got, years and years of experience of building proper tier 3 data centers. That was one of the evident things that happened. And we had Ben Gagnon on last week to talk about that. We've got other Bitcoin miners who've purchased companies that can build data centers. Look at the likes of Bit Digital and Wi-Fi, how they've managed to deliver so much in a short space of time. And we'll cover a bit more about that in the podcast. But there's a lot of expertise out there. And where there isn't expertise, companies have aligned with expertise. So I expect some of that revenue there, that 21 billion, that's a significant amount of capital there. And we know that CoreWeave don't have all their own sites. They're going out there and they're leasing sites. Yes, they've leased sites. They were trying to purchase the sites from Core Scientific, and that wasn't successful because the contract was a little bit, or appears to be a little bit one-sided towards CoreWeave. We know that they've aligned with Galaxy, so the Helios site there, which is the currently 800 megawatt site with the potential to grow significantly more than that. I think looking at 1.6 gigawatts, and that is an enormous site with potential there. But they're going to need more and more. So I think you might see more and more contracts signed in 2026 to meet the requirement to deliver these contracts in later years of that 6-year period they're talking about there. So it might be they're okay to deliver what they can now, but they'll need to plan and deliver more and more compute power as the years go forward, and that's only going to benefit the current Bitcoin miners who are transitioning to HPC.
Yeah, it definitely will. And I can say I've been using Claude myself. It's a great platform, a lot of optionality there. And if people continue signing up, I don't think it'll be long until CoreWeave is back knocking on Core Scientific's door. Now, as we move over to the miners, I noted when we were talking before the podcast, off to a great start today. They've pulled back a little bit over the lunch hour here, Eastern time, but still a strong showing, Anthony, most in the green. And this is on the back now, I checked, of 4 consecutive majority green days for the miners. So this is a great way to end off the week, and really nice from a portfolio perspective to see a few green days back to back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been a really good week. I know when I sort of looked at my portfolio last Friday, and we did a members podcast, and it was looking fairly challenging, to be honest. We'd pulled back a bit last week or so, and stocks were starting to look a little bit more cheaper, and but the chances are is you don't know where that drop's going to finish. Timing is everything. Fortunately, I had a couple of limit trades in that were action last week because the share prices dropped so much. I had a limit trade in Cipher, a limit trade in Riot, and both of those were filled. And now I look at the price now compared to where they were last week, and those shares are $4 or $5 higher than they were. So sometimes if you're looking to invest, it's sometimes maybe useful to have a limit trade in, limit buy or limit sell trade there. So that if the share price hits that level, you can do the sell or the buy at the same time. It's helped me out there. But a great run this week we've seen in terms of the mining stocks there. Yeah, looking at the chart there, white fiber dominating today, along with DMG. So DMG having a nice run up today. We've not seen too much in terms of share price action with them in a positive way. If you look at the 52-week range there, it's been hovering around that sort of low 20 cent position for quite some time now. But it's nice to see them in positive area. IREN's having a good day. We talked about IREN this week, where they're selling shares through the ATM. It looks likely when you see some of the sell signs on the daily trades, some of the sell orders have been quite significant, and it looks like they've been utilising the ATM at certain levels. It is a $6 billion ATM, so they've not used it all, but we will find out in the next few weeks how much of that has been used in the first effectively the first 4 months of the year, because when they put that ATM out there, they were saying it's we've already got the capital what we need for this year. This is just to sort of like if we get further requirement to invest in further stuff that's not contracted at the moment. So this is looking further ahead. So hopefully they are using it as required and not just building up a big cash position just in case, because that by selling shares you're sort of depressing the share price. The market knows that if you're selling more shares and being purchased there, the share price isn't going to rally. And we've expected you look at this week and how much the shares of TeraWulf and Cipher have improved, and Riot, and then compare that with IREN, and you can see there's sort of a little bit of a mismatch. If we move to the heat map, that probably explains it a bit better. So if you look at the 5-day movement of those top 5 or 6 miners, majority of them in the 25-33% range, and IREN's at 11%, and IREN's got a big CSP contract. So it might be that they've been using that ATM there. The one thing about the heat map is that's changing quickly now, is that 1 year change. It was last week, it was at 90%. Now we're at 173%, because as I predicted, share prices last April were sort of getting really low now. A couple of standout ones there. I mean, look at TeraWulf. You'd invested in TeraWulf last April the 9th last year, you'd be sitting on a 757% rise. But bear in mind, these share prices were getting a bit of a battering, and the hardest thing to do is to time into the market when share prices are going down, because people tried that in 2021 and thought, we've hit the bottom, and we hadn't hit anywhere near the bottom, and people thought they were getting into a good place. We saw miners buying Bitcoin at 40,000, thinking it had dropped, as far as it was going to go. You know what? It went down to 15,500. Those miners were selling that Bitcoin at a loss all the way through 2022. So it's very, very difficult. It's easy in hindsight to say I bought shares when it was $1, when it was $5, and I know I bought shares in IREN when it was just over $1, but I didn't buy millions of shares. I bought a small amount of shares which have done really, really well. I think you've got some of those as well, Bryce. Where the share price was in the $5 range, and if you look at where the share price is today, nice percentages up there. But the conviction when a share price has dropped 70 or 80% to go in there with a serious amount of investment, that's few and far between. There's not enough people who are experienced in the market enough to go and do that. And I always sort of take things with a pinch of salt when I hear everyone's been buying at the lows and selling at the highs. It's very, very hard to time the market. One thing you did time, Bryce, though, is when you sold them shares at $76. You'll look back on that if we don't see any big rise this year in IREN, saying that you got out at the right time there and managed to buy back in at such a lower price.
I was going to say, yeah, both of us, I think, hit a 10x officially on Wulf and IREN, and then took advantage of the spike there, bought back in. So that one worked well. But as you say, for everyone that works perfectly, there's a lot that didn't. And in regards to Riot, this is one you and I have high conviction on. I just wanted to remind everyone, their deal with AMD started January 30th. So we're actually going to start to see HPC AI revenue in Q1 alongside the likes of IREN and some of those other companies, Core Scientific. So this is going to be a pivotal quarter, and you can really feel the momentum kind of shifting from bear to bull. I also chuckle, Anthony, there was a lot of people expecting IREN to go down to $28 before they bought in. We'll see if it ever gets down there, but as it looks right now, to your point, a lot of people trying to time that absolute bottom, and it's just impossible to do. Speaking of white fiber, you also mentioned they were off to a great start today, up over 13% at one point. We'll talk about a reason as to why in a second. They put out some great pictures of what's known as Colossus. This is the big red crane on their NC1 site, but you can again see, Anthony, the scale, the speed, the pace, and the size of this site really on par with what we've seen from some of the large co-location deals in Texas.
Oh yeah, if you were to go and see and witness the size of Childress, what they're delivering in terms of HPC there for 200 megawatts, even though this site is small, that they are massive sites. There'll be hundreds of workers at this site here, working on this site here, delivering that site ready. And one thing about Sam, when he was on the podcast last week, he was highlighting the time scale, and it looks like they're going to get that time scale, very, very quickly. They've got, they've already purchased their company internally that have been doing this for a while now. So this is, again, a very good strategy to use there. Rinse and repeat. They've already got a couple of sites that they've refurbished and are out there. One was handed to a client, one that they've got in-house there. This is their biggest site. This is their flagship site for the moment. But with the amount of power in the pipeline, I don't know if it's going to be the flagship site for too long. They've probably got their eyes on something even bigger, or maybe to actually expand this current facility larger than it is.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to come in terms of white fiber Bit Digital. They actually had coverage initiated today from BTIG. So this was on Wi-Fi. I'll let you talk about some of the ratios compared to some of the peers here like Core Scientific and Cipher. But it's interesting, Anthony, when you look at the progress they're making, you look at the notoriety that white fiber is receiving, still Bit Digital trading at a 24% discount to NAV. This is one that you and I scratch our heads. You'll see white fiber up 10% a day, Bit Digital down. It just seems the market doesn't understand Bit Digital holds 70% of white fiber.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just take the Ethereum holdings there of 350 million, and bear in mind, Ethereum, we don't mention that as much as we mention Bitcoin, but Ethereum price has been rallying over this last week as well, and in sort of parallel with Bitcoin. So as the Bitcoin price is rising, Ethereum's been rising, that size of their treasury position getting much bigger. And there's literally just over 100 million from the market capitalization to the value of the Ethereum in the treasury. So that doesn't account then for any cash, any assets that it has, and the 70% of white fiber, which at today's price is currently valued, that's 70% of just over 400 million. So, if you're buying shares in BitDigital at the moment, you're getting a significant discount on the assets on the balance sheet there. And it says at the moment, BitDigital shares are trading at a 24% discount to current net asset value per share. So, this is where, you're putting a dollar investment in there, and you're getting effectively $1.24 in terms of assets for every dollar you invest in Bit Digital. And if you look at investing in, say, TeraWulf, for every dollar you invest in TeraWulf at the moment, you're getting approximately maybe 3 cents in assets. And the reason for that is they've took out all their borrowings in terms of, raising that capital to deliver all their contracts. Now, moving forward, shares are valued at future EBITDA ratios. And when these companies were, predominantly mining companies, and the vast majority are still mining companies, the vast majority haven't received any income from HPC. Bit Digital is certainly one of those that have, and now are doing that through Wi-Fi as well. IREN are doing some CSP in their British Columbia sites, and Hive Digital are also doing it. And Core Scientific, as you quite rightly said, they've already handed over 350 megawatts of compute power to CoreWeave, so we'll start seeing that coming through there. But the likes of TeraWulf and Cipher, who have 400, 500 megawatts of compute power in contract terms to be delivered, haven't received any of their revenues yet. So, but the future is how we value these companies. And if you look at the table that has been provided by Matt Siegel there, you can see how they look at the EV to EBITDA ratios going forward. Now, for Bitcoin mining, I asked some of the lead analysts when I went to Sweden about 18 months ago and said, how do you calculate, revenues for Bitcoin miners and do and price action there? And to be honest with you, the average came back 2 to 3x. And I said, what if they were to sort of start delivering HPC? And I was told maybe 15 to 20x. And if you can see that table there and look at 2027, you can see white fiber at the moment is only being valued at a 3.7x. White fiber is delivering HPC, and we know from the values and the contract they signed with Nscale they are not dissimilar for other contracts that are out there. And then if you go down and look at Core Scientific, Cipher, TeraWulf, and Applied, you can see their multiples there average very much close to 15, 16x for 2027. So that, to myself and to obviously Matt Siegel, who put this out there, white fiber in comparison at the moment is looking at undervalued by a 4x position. You'd have to grow the share price by 4x to sort of literally get on a par with where the others are. So that's the sort of the challenge. And I think Sam's had this point when it was all Bit Digital. Now he's managed to segregate the HPC elements and have a second public company, Wi-Fi aligned. And initially we saw, obviously both companies having significant values, but at the moment now you can see where, we've seen some of these values and miners depressed over this last 12-month period. We're getting back to that stage where we were before, where they're not getting the credit that they should be for what they are delivering.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you and I both have exposure to this company. I like the Bit Digital route because not only are you getting the discount on white fiber shares, you're also getting the discount on that NAV multiple in terms of Ethereum. So you kind of get a double discount, so to speak. And if you look at these enterprise value to EBITDA ratios, quite an eye opener, as you talked about there, Anthony. Now, the next one we have for you, BitFuFu. This is another company, a unique business model. They talk a lot about the cloud mining in the opening remarks here. They came out with their March production result. I'll let you walk through the numbers, but this was a strong month, and you can really see how this cloud mining business strategy sets them up for success when we see a lot of volatility or Bitcoin price pulling back like we have over the last few months here.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a good month, even though there was a small pullback in their self mining and a slight pullback in their cloud hash rate as well, but very fractionally. We're talking a few percentage points in terms of their energized hash rate there. I think 1% down. In terms of total Bitcoin mined, 214 compared to 227 in February. Now, February was a 28-day month, so that's a 6% drop there. However, self-mined Bitcoin was actually higher at 43 compared to 37, and that does justify the fact that there were 3 extra days of mining. The self-mining hash rate did come down by 8% to 3.3 from 3.6. Operational power also marginally down to 457 megawatts from 463. And Bitcoin sold, 80 Bitcoin sold in the month of March, in line with the Treasury strategy, because they've obviously been trying to increase their holdings, but making sure that they have some sort of responsibility around their treasury management. I mean, you've still got to pay operational costs. You've got to pay capital costs for growth. How many levers do you have available? We've seen a number of miners start to actually sell some of their operational mined Bitcoin to cover those costs. And as we can see here from BitFuFu, they sold slightly less than twice their production in terms of what they sold in March there, but they still maintain a hodl of 1,794, which, if you look at the value as at the end of March, that's got a valuation of 122.4 million, effectively the same value as their slightly bigger hodl in February had there. And that's because the Bitcoin price has slightly increased month by month from February to March. So valuation there at the moment. And if you look at the valuation today, that's an even bigger rise. So, we might see a higher hodl value, even if they don't add to the hodl at the end of April, providing Bitcoin goes on the same trajectory as at the moment. But even above where we are now, it looks like it could be, a positive month for most of the miners, especially when you're able to mine at $73,000 for your Bitcoin. But overall, a good month again for BitFuFu.
Now, question to close out here today, Anthony. BitFuFu is a good example. We know they're looking into the AI strategy. They haven't yet announced a client, similar to what we see with Mara or CleanSpark. Then we've got companies that have signed the contract. They're building the infrastructure, but haven't yet received revenues. And then finally, that bucket that's already receiving revenues, as you just mentioned, white fiber, Hive. belong to that bucket. My question to you, as it relates to the multiple discussion, at what point do these companies start to get that re-rate? Because we've seen now companies in each one of these buckets, some have got the re-rate, some haven't. We've talked to CEOs. A lot of them have said, look, once you get that contract inked, that opens up the doors for financing. That's kind of when the re-rate starts. In your opinion, based on what we've seen so far, when can we expect that multiple re-rate?
Yeah, the re-rate will definitely start as soon as a contract is signed. If you look at all those stocks that are on the heat map there, it's only the stocks that are really signed. There is an exception in terms of Keel Infrastructure, who, if you remember a year ago, were sort of like coming to the end of that discussions with Riot as to whether Riot was going to acquire Bitfarms. It had a sizable stake, and they decided then to sort of like start selling their stake in Keel, and that enabled Keel to start recovering from some of the price reductions that it had seen the previous year. So a lot of the benefit they've seen in the last 12 months is basically them getting on their own 2 feet again and starting to look at reorganizing in the US, and also highlighting their strategy for HPC. But every other miner, even like Riot, when they announced their deal with AMD, and Cipher and TeraWulf, they had massive re-rates when they signed the deals. And every deal since then has been a re-rate. You go back to Core Scientific when they signed their deal there. The speculation, there was speculation a week before the announcement, and the share price had gone up. I think it was $5 or $6 from $12 to $18, I think $19 in a space of a week. As soon as there was a thought that, and that was a 200 megawatt deal, they've got 590 megawatts now. So I think as soon as you see some of these other miners that are looking to use their power for high performance compute, but haven't got a deal in place at the moment, and I'm trying to think of who's probably the closest one there. Maybe it's Keel Infrastructure with regards to, say, Washington there. Looks like they've got everything in a row in terms of they've got the capital to build the site. It's a case of, will the conversations they're having with potential clients give them something like a 15, 20-year deal? And when you have that size of deal, even for that size of power output there, 18 megawatts doesn't sound a lot, but believe you me, it's going to be delivering, if it's 18 megawatts of compute, it's going to be delivering, $36 to $40 million per year in revenues. Because one thing we have seen since these contracts, every time a new contract is announced, revenues seem to be that little bit higher as well. So it looks like Ben might be proven right in terms of waiting for the right deal to come along, and because he can see the value of the power assets that not only he has, but all these mining companies have.
Yeah, well said. And as we mentioned, earnings coming out for Q1 in just a couple of weeks. We expect a lot of excitement here in terms of revenue, deals, announcements, site acquisition. So stay tuned for that. That concludes the week, you guys. Phenomenal week for Bitcoin and the miners. Hopefully they can close green here. We've got about 2 hours left in trading. Have an excellent weekend. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here on Monday.